Uh, when I was growing up, I was told that science and logic on the one hand were opposed to things like spirituality and religion on the other. As I began to study these things in later years, though, I realized that this is patently false, and that science, history, and logic actually provide some of the best evidence available to show that God's existence is logically necessary. At least that's how it seemed to me. As it turned out, my interest in study of these issues coincided with a revolution that is occurring in the field of philosophy in the past 40 years or so, which is, by definition, is a field focused on the study of wisdom and the nature of the prime reality. A few years ago, prominent atheist philosopher Quentin Smith wrote an article about this revolution that appeared in the magazine Philo. In that article, Smith bemoaned the recent resurgence of theism that is occurring among academic philosophers. According to Smith, philosophy departments have now become a stronghold for theism, and he estimates that about a quarter to a third of academic philosophers have become Christians. The reason that this has occurred is that powerful new evidence for the God of the Bible has emerged very recently in the disciplines of history, science, and metaphysics. The following are several facts that I discuss in my recent book, which have very metaphysical implications. Fact number one. Cosmologists across the board are virtually unanimous in agreeing that the universe began to exist at a finite point in the past, and did not exist from eternity past. By universe, we mean all time, space, matter, and energy expanding into being in a tremendous explosion from a single point, and there was no matter, energy, time, or space prior to that moment. Logically prior to that moment. Think about the implications of this. It can be boiled down to one syllogism. Premise one, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise two, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, therefore the universe must have a cause. Now what must the nature of this cause be? Given the fact that this cause initiated the beginning of time, space, matter, and energy, it must be transcendent to time, space, matter, and energy. Moreover, since these phenomena don't exist from eternity past, but rather were suddenly brought into existence a finite time ago, it apparently selected a specific point at which to initiate these phenomena, which suggests that it is also a personal being. If the cause of the universe were simply a set of necessary and sufficient conditions, it would have been in place from time immemorial. But cosmologists date the universe at 3.73 billion years old, which is the blink of an eye contrasted with eternity. Fact number two. Scientists are also virtually unanimous in agreeing that hundreds of constants and quantities in the universe appear to be fine-tuned to an astonishing degree to allow for the existence of life. The secular label for this fine-tuning is the anthropic principle. For example, the expansion rate of the universe is finely tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 120th power, which is a vanishingly small number within the range of possible values. Probability specialists consider anything with smaller odds than 1 in 10 to the 50th power to be mathematically impossible. Please remember that number because that's going to come up a little later also. Again, anything beyond 1 in 10 to the 50th power is considered mathematically impossible. There are many, many constants and quantities that are fine-tuned, tuned to a finer precision than this. To call the odds against their collective occurrence by random chance astronomical would be a vast understatement. In addition to the initiation of time, space, matter, and energy at the Big Bang, there was also the injection of a tremendous amount of ordered information. In fact, the largest number ever used to describe anything actually physical is the low probability of the initial entropy at the Big Bang singularity, which is fine-tuned to the astonishing exactitude of 1 in 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123. The fine-tuning of these constants and quantities are not the result of any known law, and are far, far beyond the possibility of chance. And therefore I think it's reasonable to conclude that they're due to design. Fact number three. Proteins are the basic building blocks of life. What most people don't know is that the vast majority of proteins that can form from their amino acid component parts are useless for life. According to Doug Axe of Cambridge University, the odds of a single functional protein arising by chance is 1 in 10 to the 164th power. For the suite of proteins necessary in the simplest possible functional cell, it's 1 in 10 to the 41,000th power. Agnostic Yale University physicist Harold Morowitz calculated the odds that the simplest conceivable bacterium, assembling from a broth of its component parts, is 1 in 10 to the 100 billionth power. Since all three of these numbers are way beyond 1 in 10 to the 50th power, as are numerous other necessary conditions of a cell, it's impossible for these events to have happened by chance. Therefore, I think it's reasonable to conclude that life is here due to design. Fact number four. What if we just ignored the previous problem and assumed that we're starting the Darwinian process from the bacterial level? One of the world's most prominent evolutionists, Dr. Francisco Ayala of UC Irvine, calculated that the minimal odds of human beings evolving from the bacterial level are 1 in 10 to the 1,000,000th power. 3 physicists, John Barrow, Brandon Carter, and Frank Tipler, did the same calculation, but included some important factors that Ayala overlooked, and came up with the number 1 in 10 to the 24,000,000th power. Again, according to probability theorists, any event with lower odds than 1 in 10 to the 50th power is mathematically impossible. Therefore, unguided Darwinian evolution is mathematically impossible. The enormous scale of these two biogenetic problems has caused scientists in recent years to actually speculate that aliens may have seeded life on Earth. Fact number 5. Even if one were to grant a Darwinian origin of life for the sake of discussion, there is no plausible Darwinian account for the existence of minds. If we are simply machines made of meat, we should be like robots who follow procedures and protocols for self-perpetuation like a computer program. But from a Darwinian standpoint, there is no reason we should have self-awareness or free will while we do this. When you reflect on it, self-awareness and free will are extravagant additions to what Darwinism should create. If we have a soul, however, self-awareness and free will make sense. Fact number 6. The existence of a realm of objective moral values that we all apprehend on a daily basis bespeaks a transcendent anchor for these moral values. If we are simply highly evolved animals, things like rape, murder, and thievery are not objectively wrong, as we observe these things in the animal kingdom all the time, and don't consider them to be moral offenses. This principle can also be boiled down to a single syllogism. Premise 1, if God does not exist, objective moral values don't exist. Premise 2, objective moral values do exist. Conclusion, therefore God exists. Fact number 7. There is early, independent, and multiply attested documentation that Jesus Christ fulfilled many specific Old Testament messianic prophecies that were given hundreds of years before his birth. The odds that Jesus Christ fulfilled these by chance alone is less than 1 in 10 to the 150th power. As we learned previously, anything with lower odds than 1 in 10 to the 50th power is mathematically impossible by chance alone. Therefore, his fulfillment of these prophecies seems to have been supernatural. Fact number 8. Many people believe that the Shroud of Turin was proven to be a forgery with the publication in 1988 of carbon-14 dating from shroud samples that suggested a date of around 1300 AD. What most people don't know about this artifact is that the world's foremost experts on carbon dating have determined that the dating was contaminated by a bioplastic mold that frequently grows on textile artifacts and that has been invalidated. Virtually every other test of the shroud has affirmed its authenticity in general, and additionally, the likelihood that the image was created by an extremely subtle radiation. According to Dr. Kevin Eastman, an imaging expert at Eastman Kodak, it would take an atomic laser in conjunction with a supercomputer to forge the image on the Shroud of Turin. Therefore, another syllogism follows. Premise 1. It would take an atomic laser in conjunction with a supercomputer to forge the image on the Shroud of Turin. Premise 2. This technology does not exist. Conclusion. Therefore, this image arising on the shroud was a supernatural occurrence. In terms of explanatory scope and power, the resurrection of the crucified Christ fits this artifact to a T. Fact number 9, the resurrection of Jesus. Excuse me. There are 3 facts concerning the fate of Jesus of Nazareth that are accepted by the majority of New Testament scholars of all worldviews, spanning the range from atheists to committed Christians. Number 1, the discovery of his empty tomb. Number 2, his post-mortem appearances. And number 3, the origin of his disciples' belief in his resurrection. These 3 facts are well established in history. The hypothesis that God raised Jesus from the dead is the best explanation of these facts, it seems to me. The explanatory scope and power of every alternative explanation proposed to date have paled in comparison to the resurrection hypothesis. The hypothesis God raised Jesus from the dead entails that the God revealed by Jesus of Nazareth exists. Therefore, I think it's reasonable to conclude that the God revealed by Jesus of Nazareth exists. Fact number 10, the immediate experience of God. I think this proposition may be best stated as a syllogism. Premise 1, beliefs which are appropriately grounded may be rationally accepted as properly basic beliefs, not grounded in argument. Premise 2, belief that the biblical God exists is appropriately grounded. Conclusion, therefore, belief that the biblical God exists may be rationally accepted as a properly basic belief, not grounded in argument. In conclusion, we live in a cultural milieu that is highly secularized, so it's very easy to be drawn into atheistic presuppositions simply through a sort of cultural osmosis. When I was younger, I doubted my properly basic belief in God due to this pervading environmental influence. Later on, however, I realized that history is laden with thousands of examples of errors when both the masses and the experts were wrong on worldview and many other important things, so that therefore we should all respectfully question purported authority and consider every evidence available. Almost done. When the evidence available is examined with honesty, the presumed to be authoritative defeaters of the properly basic belief in God dissolve and are replaced with tremendous evidence that he does in fact exist.